Hi, I'm Old Norse specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. Today on my channel about Old Norse language, culture, and myth, I want to talk about exactly who gets into Valhåll, often known as Valhalla today, in the actual myths that survive from the Middle Ages in Scandinavia. Now, of course, one of the main things that I emphasize in this channel is going back to our medieval sources and not relying on modern extrapolations and speculations based on them. And there's a curiously persistent set of expectations or beliefs about Valhalla today that actually have nothing to do with our medieval sources whatsoever, which are in fact pretty vague about Valhalla. I've talked in another video about the characteristics of Valhalla as a place, as described in works such as the poem Grimnismal in the Poetic Edda, and as fleshed out a little bit in the work of Snorri Sturluson in his Prose Edda. Now, it's important to remember that the poems in the Poetic Edda are probably passed down orally over several centuries before they're written down in the 1200s by Christians who were apparently interested in preserving the narratives about the gods that earlier Icelanders had believed in, but nothing about the faith or the religious practices of earlier Icelanders from the pre-Christian period. Snorri Sturluson, in writing his Prose Edda, knows many of those poems and draws on them, but also is heavily influenced by Christianity and wants to present a systematic account of what the mythical world of the believers in these pre-Christian gods was like. He wants there to be a sort of canon, when in fact what we find in the Poetic Edda and other sources, mostly poetic sources that we can trace back to that pre-Christian period, is nothing like a canon. We have a lot of contradictory ideas. We also have nothing like an attempt to actually present a one canon consistent picture, right? There's no, as far as we know, no body of people who determined what the canon set of beliefs was. That being the case, we have a really consistent picture of who goes to Valhalla, and that is vopndáðir men, weapon-dead men. Now, men, singular madr in Old Norse, can be gender neutral, but very often what we actually see is the alliterating phrase vopndáðir verrar, weapon-dead men, and that is a word that is not neutral in its implications to human beings. That means specifically males. We have no evidence whatsoever that women were considered capable of going to Valhalla after death. Now, Valkyries seem to sort of work there, but it doesn't seem like there's any way for a woman to go there in the afterlife. Now, the persistent misapprehension that I encounter is that women who died in childbirth were considered to go to Valhalla. I've wondered for a long time about where this belief came from, because it's nowhere in our medieval sources. I wondered if it was something that maybe some modern guru had said or something, but it turns out I think I have an answer for why people believe this today. And it's because so consistently today in popular culture, Spartans and Vikings are mixed up. I've talked about this a little bit before in another video where I mentioned that the hyper-soldierly organization of Spartan society has influenced the way that people look at the Vikings, which actually weren't organized into armies in the same way. Both cultures are hyper-masculine, if you will, hyper-combative, but the Norse aren't organized soldiers. They are more like combative farmers in their primary orientation, whereas Spartan free citizens were expected to be warriors first. But one of the ways that I think that the belief that the Spartans and the Vikings were more or less the same, or the way that our conceptions about Spartans sort of leak into our conceptions about Vikings, is this idea about women dying in childbirth going to Valhalla. I think it goes back to this, and this is a little bit of a long story, so bear with me. One of our major sources, and it has been for 2,000 years, about the Spartans is Plutarch's Life of Lycurgus. Now, Lycurgus is the semi-legendary lawgiver who stands at the beginning of the Spartan tradition. in his text about the life of Lycurgus, in section 27.3, we read that only two kinds of people could have their names inscribed on their tombstones in Sparta. Men who died in battle, a man who died in battle, andros en polemoi. And folks, you've had to deal with me pronouncing Latin before, so you're going to have to deal with me pronouncing ancient Greek for a little while. And women who died holding holy office, a woman who died in a holy office. Gunaikos ton hieron apothanoton. Now, I took classics into grad school, but I am not a Greek expert, so I spoke with my colleague Luke Gordon at the University of New Mexico about this, and he gave me the most literal translation of this passage. The only two people who could get their names inscribed on a tombstone in ancient Sparta were, quote, a man who has died in battle or a woman from among the priesthood who has died. How does this connect to the notion of women dying in childbirth going to Valhalla? Well, in mid-20th century, classicist Kurt Latta amended the part about the woman dying in holy office to a woman dying in lehoi, in her childbed, based on the fact that there are some gravestones for women dying in their childbed. Now, this is a pretty aggressive emendation of the text of Plutarch, and this has been discussed in great detail by a classicist. Let me point you to his article, Matthew Dillon, and an article in Hermes, volume 135, that's from 2007, wrote an article called Were Spartan Women Who Died in Childbirth Honored with Grave Inscriptions? But in this article, Dillon points out that the inscriptions on gravestones of women dying in childbirth aren't ancient Spartan in date, and thus ought not to affect our perception of what Plutarch says in his text about the life of Lycurgus. It also is very consistent with Spartan society's special role for priests and priestesses. So Dillon says there's no need to make this emendation. Probably Spartans just put their inscriptions with names on the graves of men who died in battle or women who died in the position of priestess. But this notion that the Spartans honored both men who died in battle and women who died in childbirth leaks into our perception of Old Norse society, and people start saying, well, if someone who died in battle goes to Valhalla, I also heard women dying in childbirth associated with men who died in battle and another ancient warrior culture. We tend to mix up ancient warrior cultures. Before long, people are saying on the internet, probably also in some popular books, that women who died in childbirth went to Valhalla, even though that's said nowhere in our Old Norse sources. Now, of course, I ought to point this out, as I often am at pains to do. This isn't me telling you that women who died in childbirth don't deserve some particular honor or something. I'm telling you that nothing in our ancient sources suggests this. So probably Spartan women who died in childbirth didn't get their name in the gravestone, and women who died in childbirth in the Viking Age went to hell just like everybody else, just like most of us are going to be said to do. And again, all that we really see in our Old Norse sources is that men who die by means of weapons go to Valhalla. That means a man who dies probably standing up in battle, holding a weapon, killed by another man's weapon, as far as we can tell. Certainly in poems like Eriksmal and Håkonarmal, where men are actually narrated arriving in Valhalla and talking to Odin, that is the case of how they have died. And we see similar assumptions. Again, nowhere is this spelled out, like this is who exactly goes to hell, this is who exactly goes to Valhalla. But we do read out of narratives in the sagas, men being assumed to go to Valhalla if they die in battles. So, there you have it. A man who dies fighting is likely to go to Valhalla. All the rest of us doomed to hell, including all women, all children, apparently. And to pretend otherwise is just to distort what our sources say. We can maybe extrapolate, we can maybe make fiction in which Vikings might hold alternative beliefs, but it's unlikely that they actually did, at least in the late 900s in Iceland, in the period when the poems such as Grímnismál, Hávamál, Vafthrúðismál were probably composed to be written down a few centuries later by the Christian descendants of those last pagans in Iceland. I hope this has been somewhat informative or interesting in addressing this common question. I hope that if you're interested in Norse myth, you'll check out the very many videos on my channel about Norse myth and related subjects. I hope you'll check out especially my Wanderer's Valhåll, very special edition of Valhåll coming out in November 2019 from Hackett Publishing. This includes the Old Norse text side by side with the English text, as well as a full commentary explaining the Old Norse text for those who are trying to read it for the first time, in addition to some related texts such as Darðarljóð, the Song of the Valkyries, and Eiríksmál and Håkonarmál, about two men arriving in Valhalla. For now, from beautiful Colorado, let me wish you all the best.